Okay, we are live on YouTube. And now I'm going to start recording. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this divine person, or as Verena was just saying, divine being panel conversation for the Rebecoming the One 2023 symposium. And for any of you watching this recording after the fact, this symposium is free and available indefinitely. So we have some of the speakers here from the symposium, but there are a total of 34 speakers, 34 free talks, and a total of 4 free panel discussions, in addition to some optional workshops. So please sign up with the link that will be with this video if you haven't already, to access all of the amazing talks. And the way that this symposium is organized is that we are now in week 3 of a month long of feeling into holding space for this collective healing around gender, our relationships to gender and sexuality. And the first week was focused on the divine feminine. The second week was focused on the divine masculine. And now this week is focused on whatever you want to call it, the divine person, the divine being. And so we are here to really open up this conversation, this question about, there's so many things that go into this, just this topic of the divine person or the divine being, including what are the pros and cons of exploring the polarities of gender? What are the pros and cons of then, like, what's the medicine that focusing on the divine person or the non-binary or the gender fluidity can bring us? And also another topic that's been coming up a lot in this week is how we can support ourselves in all of our gender identities, all of our sexual orientations, all of the ways that our diversity expresses itself, and the needs of queer identified humans on the planet, and including our youth. So there's lots and lots and lots of things here that we may talk about, whatever we feel called to talk about, and probably lots of things I haven't even named. But before we officially start, before we really dive into it, I would love to hand this over to Jonathan Coe, who is my co-facilitator, my wonderful, wonderful co-facilitator of this week, who lots of people are telling me over and over again how much they love you. So I second that. And yeah, I'm grateful to Verena, who introduced us a year ago. And I know Verena thirds that. So Jonathan, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing us all together. This is so special. So I want us to begin with a little bit of, I'll keep this short, but let's do a little bit of an embodiment sensing, because we're going to be talking a lot and we're going to be kind of here, on top of here and the body as well. But I invite you, wherever you are, if you are driving or you're operating heavy machineries, obviously don't close your eyes, but if you want, you can close your eyes. But what I like to tell people is to imagine an eye, like a large eye that has been turning outwards, and now just turn it inwards and let yourself start to come back into your own experience. Maybe noticing your breath, noticing the perimeter of your body, noticing the sensation on your skin. My invitation for you today is to start paying attention to the parts of your body that are moving. Maybe you notice liquid within your body shifting around. Maybe you notice your torso gently moving from side to side. Maybe you notice your head even in stillness, not fully being still. Notice the movements. And notice the ways that your body is always shifting, that your cells are always dying and regenerating, that water is coming in and out of your body. Food is coming in and out of your body. The sunlight is coming in and out of your body. Begin to bring your attention outwards, outside of the perimeter of your physical body, and start sensing your environment. Sense the ways that you are a distinct being, that you have your own body, but that you're also porous. You're also always interacting with and impacted by your environment. For me, I start noticing the noises that are in my environment, distant sounds that I can't control, maybe even the quietness. And the next time you take an in-breath, notice how you are taking in oxygen from trees that you may never know. And you're exhaling carbon dioxide, feeding trees you will never know. Allow yourself to sit in this awareness for a couple more moments. On your next out breath, give yourself a hug, and we can come back to this space. Thank you.
Okay. So now I would love to just let you all know who we have here. We have many wonderful humans. So I'm just going to briefly give your names and the teeny tiny gist of tip of an iceberg of who you are. And then I'm going to go around the circle and ask you kind of this opening question. So we have with us Louise Eddington, who is an astrologer and a writer, written several wonderful books on astrology. Jordan Smith also is an astrologer and a blogger and a mom, and well, lots of us are parents here, but anyway, yes.
Yeah.
And Michelle Sapresti, who does art as process and lots art related therapeutic ways of being, knowing ourselves, and she's actually doing a workshop related to that tomorrow, which is wonderful. And then Verena Burrell, another astrologer. Lots of us are astrologers here today. And yeah, many beautiful things that you do too. And Nikki Kuttner, if I'm saying your name correctly. Yeah, who is sort of, okay. Your name correctly. Kuttner. Okay, Verena and Nikki speak German and I do not. Yeah, so Nikki is a licensed marriage and family therapist and does expressive art therapy, and has a lot of experience, in particular, if I'm speaking for you correctly, with queer identified adults, youth, etc. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And other humans too.
Other human and other humans of many varieties. Yeah. And then Jonathan, who is also an astrologer and a blogger and a musician and other things, and me. So wonderful. Feels like a beautiful mosaic of beings. So yeah, in this first kind of opening of our conversation, I would love to just invite each of you, each of us, to drop in and feel, like a nugget, like in a brief 1 or 2 minutes, what is alive for you in this moment? There's no right or wrong around this topic of the divine person, the divine being, in regard to the big overarching topic of rebecoming the one and healing our relationships to gender and sexuality. Is that a clear enough question?
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys want to pop in, or should we go around a circle? Circle. Okay. All right. Nikki, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I mean, what's most alive for me is a celebration of our uniqueness, that each of us, there's one of us. We have a certain body, we have a certain way of being, and that is the beauty that we are bringing to this world, to the universe. And yet, most of us struggle with our uniqueness. And it's not about being special, because we're also part of that matrix of humanity. But to really love ourselves and being truly in our uniqueness means we don't have to fit in. We don't have to conform. And that is a continuous unpeeling of our conditioning and socialization, and then also the trauma or violence that we might have experienced in our lifetime that has attacked our uniqueness in some way. So for me, it's really truly a celebration of who uniquely we are and becoming and unfolding. And how do we identify? And our identities can be our healing, while they sometimes also are in the way of our healing. So for me, what's most alive is really coming, and I loved what Jonathan did in the meditation, beginning with the internal eye, and then also seeing our connection to the larger whole. And that, I think, is the journey. And I like Mahatma Gandhi's term, be the change you want to see in the world, right? It's a continuous journey of really being in our own healing. And each of us also want to have some acknowledgement from the outside. But the true journey and the true work is here in my own self, and the continuous journey and process of, can I love myself fully with all that I am, all that I am becoming? And so that's, I think, most alive for me in terms of being with the divine person, the divine being, and also knowing that while I have a certain body in this time and space, and I have a certain history I carry around with me, there's always more than I am. I am also the elements. I am also my ancestors who were the starfish, who were the minerals, who were, all of that is alive in me. The ancestry of all beings, right? Of all there is, plant world, is also part of me. And yet I have a unique expression of who I am in this moment, or becoming, and in my humanity. And I do want to also speak to the places of access and why we have certain movements that help us. I mean, we're in Pride Month right now, celebrating our diversity, because historically there was lack of access, there was violence, and still is happening, and lack of access legally, and all of that is also a part of the reality we are living. It's a lived experience of not being included, of being violated, of being stigmatized, of being abused. So we're also healing those wounds, right? Or the wounds between the masculine and the feminine has a lot to do with what is happening societally, what gave us access or not access, why we were silenced or had a voice or didn't have a voice. So that's also part of that journey, besides celebrating our divine uniqueness, is also healing the wounds of history, we can call it, that are alive in us as well. So it's that balance, and how do we cultivate that self-love? And I'm doing the workshop tomorrow about gathering tools of really being in the self-loving, self-nourishing way with ourselves, with all that has hurt us, all that has wounded us.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Louise, what's alive for you?
Okay, well, what's to add? Except that I really come at it from the basis as an astrologer, of course, but I would echo everything Nikki said. But and I've actually tried to address it in my second book, The Complete Guide to Astrology, that we are moving into this more kind of quantum time. We're moving into the age of Aquarius, where, everything is, quantum theory is kind of proving some of the ideas that we've had for a long, long time, that everything is interconnected and everything bounces off each other, including the planets and the planetary bodies. And when I look at an astrology chart, when I come to a client, I can't tell if it's, a person who identifies as male or female or anywhere in between, or if it's an event, or if it's a dog's chart or a cat's chart or whatever. And we all contain all of this cosmic energy within us. And I see my job as an astrologer to help people understand all of that within them. We all have a Mars, which is usually described as masculine. I actually have tried to encourage changing the language a little bit. We all have a Venus within us. We all have it in different signs, and I think the more we tune into this interconnectedness, then the more we understand and treat the individual, the being, as that individual. And I see it through the lens of astrology. So that's how it really comes to me. And the polarities, we have the polarities in the chart, but they are not separate. They work together. So, everything is interconnected, everything. And Jonathan, I loved your, the tree breath. I was like, oh, that's speaking my language.
I see you. Mhm.
Jordan, it's alive for you.
I have been thinking a lot about, and I'm like Louise, and I don't know, a good chunk of us here, I think in archetypes and astrologically. And what I've been thinking about as Pluto re-entered Capricorn and is retrograde is this understanding that we're in a restructuring period of time, and that really, consciousness is genderless. Like it's kind of echoing what Louise said. You can't look at a chart and be like, oh, this is a man, or this is someone who identifies as a woman, or they were AFAB, AMAB. You don't see any of that because you're looking at the totality of consciousness for someone. Mm-hmm. And their own state of becoming. And I feel like this is a really momentous time where all of us are recentering by restructuring our consciousness to really get rid of social constructs that keep us from experiencing the inner community within and the inner uniqueness within each one of us. And that's kind of touching on this dance with Pluto going back into Aquarius as well. So it's this time period of, we need language right now to be able to identify and to express ourselves. But the language is actually giving birth to this structure of how we're really in a more soul-centered, genderless form of consciousness that's wanting to arise right now. And so that's what I'm thinking of whenever we're talking about the divine person, is really, what does it take for us to have and to remember this, like, and what's it going to take for us to restructure our consciousness to get back to this? And at first we need the language to be able to get there. But you know, as we have the language and we break down these old structures that are more patriarchal or dealing with societal constructs, we get to implement more natural ways of understanding the inner community and its most timeless form of being genderless. So that's what is arising for me.
I'm feeling very I feel tears coming up when you're talking. Yeah. Okay, Michelle, what's alive for you?
Well, I want to say that I really resonate with so much that has been said, and I really like how you put it, Jordan. You know, a genderless, soul-centered consciousness. Thank you for defining that. That's a beautiful definition and has a lot of meaning for me. And I agree that we are late stage capitalism. These old structures are crumbling, they're changing. I feel like the pandemic has sort of expedited that. It's provided an opportunity for things to fall apart and come together in a different way. And I know what's really alive for me is when I woke up this morning, I was really quite overcome with grief. I watched a TikTok about a transgender youth, and it was his mother reading their letter before they unalived themselves. And so that's kind of what started my day. And I have 5 children myself, and 4 out of 5 of my children are on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. So of course, as a mother, this struck me so deeply. And, you know, I am just really asking myself the questions of how can I further deconstruct my own internalized voice of empire?
Michelle.
And as a cisgender white woman of privilege, I know that I can be doing more. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be part of this collective. I feel the strength of the collective. I feel the strength and the power of the invitation of new ways of being. And I feel this collective energy gathering. And I know that all of our thoughts generate energy that goes out into the field and out into the collective. And so how can I more deeply love? How can I more deeply show my love? And how can I step forward and be an ally in a way that is going to invite more love for all? So that's really what's alive for me.
Again, the tears. Yeah. Yeah. Verena, what's alive for you?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for all of these shares. I really felt all of them. Yeah, there are 3 things I shortly want to tap into that feel very alive. The first thing, when I just I live in Austria, so it's already in the evening here, and I spent the day working from my terrace in my little garden. And when I just made a little break from working on my laptop and looked at my little tomato plants, I just thought, and maybe this was my Taurus sun, that everything is so divine and it doesn't matter. And I just said, maybe this panel discussion should have the name The Divine Being, because we are all made out of this divine light, which is source. And last year at the symposium, I gave a talk with the title, The Soul Has No Gender. And it's really this. And so this is the first thing that was really alive today for me. And the second thing that I felt strongly, last weekend, we had a new moon in Gemini. And what I felt very strongly around these days, and I also read the Akashic record, and some messages came through, is this importance of curiosity, and curiosity as a medicine and as a key, and curiosity really as a medicine to meet each other with openness and acceptance. And I feel with the Gemini archetype, it is about curiosity, but also in Gemini, how I feel Gemini is really this our curiosity that brings our soul into this life, and then the curiosity that we want to learn and learn constantly our whole life. This is Gemini for me. And I think that with Gemini we have this need to understand our surrounding. We want to give things names and we want to label things, because then we feel safe. And I think it's on the one hand wonderful to give things names, labels, identities, but on the other hand, there can be a shadow with that, because when we act from a place of fear and we stick to labels and identities, then it can become very, very restrictive. And so I think that especially the new moon, we had some squares to placements and planets in Pisces. And I think in Pisces, we all know that, so Neptune in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces just say to the Gemini placements, my darling, you can give the things a name, but we are all one no matter what. And I think that this is so important, that we can play with gender identities, labels, names. That makes sometimes our social life a little bit easier. But I think that on another dimension, we should always, we should not forget that this is all fluid. Gemini is mutable. And we can change our labels, and we can change our gender identities, and we can change our names when we want to. And we are not our name. I'm Verena, but I'm so much more. And if I don't like my name, Verena, I can actually change it. And I can change my gender identity if it does not feel right, because I'm constantly learning and I'm constantly evolving. So I'm in a constant evolution. So I work with evolutionary astrology. So everything is in a huge evolutionary process. And I think that is so beautiful with Gemini and Pisces, with these archetypes together, to really, on the one hand, you can give things labels and names, and that's fun, and that sometimes brings a certain way of order into our life, but on the other hand, letting it go and knowing that we are all one in a way. And the last thing that is really alive for me, today we have a Venus gate in Leo. And I had to think so much about, and I gave my talk about Venus in Leo, and we are at the moment at the end of the Venus cycle in Capricorn that started in January 2022. And that really, together with what you already mentioned, Jordan, Pluto on this very last potent degree of Capricorn again, and Venus has her last weeks in this 19 months long cycle in Capricorn. And we really feel, and I see it with my one-on-one clients, I feel it in my own life, I see it everywhere. We are at the moment in these deep deconditioning processes. So really letting go from old structures, rules, and roles that are no longer serving us, that are outdated. And really, and that is my hope with Venus and with the Venus and Leo cycle that lasts again 19 months from August on, really this coming back to our true light, which is our unique embodiment of the divine light. And that closes back to what Nikki said. So there's really this knowing, this deep knowing that we are allowed to, as cheesy as it sounds, shine our unique light. And every light is special and every light is different and unique, but it's all the unique embodiment of the divine light. So there is no right or wrong. There are no hierarchies. There is no higher or lower. There's just the oneness that comes from diversity and multiplicity. Yeah, leave it there.
Amazing. I wanted to jump in with a couple of things and then hand it to you, Jonathan. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Louise was just saying in the chat something exactly what I was just thinking, which is that so that new moon was also opposing the Galactic Center, and Neptune is squaring the Galactic Center. So for people who don't know, the Galactic Center is, the center of our galaxy. So probably a lot of us would agree with this, but maybe have different nuances of the way we would say this. But my way of saying it is that for me, when something is in relationship to the Galactic Center or the center of our galaxy, it's like we just get this up. I feel kind of like this infusion of just divine beingness or the truth of the ultimate source. Yeah, and people can, if you have nuances to that, yeah, Louise.
I just wanted to add, because the Galactic Center happens to be conjunct my ascendant, so I feel very tuned into it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just been news reports that the Galactic Center is actually they've discovered that it's actually emitting these strands of gas out into the Milky Way. And so it really is literally emitting this energy into our consciousness. So, and the new moon was right there picking it up. Neptune will be square the Galactic Center really for 2 years. So, and there's other Galactic Center activations happening right now as well from other planets. So what a time. Yeah.
I think that's so interesting if you think about this Saturn transit being ruled by that Neptune as it's squaring the Galactic Center. Because when I think of Saturn and Pisces, this is like the dissolving of any type of man-made constructs that's not in alliance with the totality of nature. And so we're in this, Pluto's going to be ruled by Uranus whenever it goes into Aquarius. It's going to do this dance. It's going to be ruled by Saturn and Pisces with its ruler squaring the Galactic Center, really like giving us, divine guidance into remembering like where we come from. And if you think about Taurus as in this natural sextile with Pisces, that's about grounding back into where we come from and all of the natural and universal laws. And so when we're thinking about Saturn and Pisces, this actually has to deal with gender constructs as well, especially why Pluto's in Capricorn. So I have this sitting on my Mercury right now, Pluto, and it's squaring my moon. So I feel, definitely the energetics of all of this right now, for sure, of really coming back into balance and harmony with nature. you know, in the most simplest form. So
Yes.
Yeah.
And oh, Verena. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to mention that, I mean, Saturn is wrapping up a cycle, so it's in the last sign of the zodiac again. And I mean, I think it's so important to remember that the transits just reflect overarching energies that are in the field. So astrology gives us the opportunity to maybe see it with more clarity, what we experience. So, and I think we all feel, and you, with astrology, we can see it through an archetypal lens and we can see the bigger cycles. But what we all feel at the moment is this deep pressure for transformation and for evolution, and that so many old systems are arising again and coming up to the surface, and it's painful. That's painful. And I'm not living in the United States, but I see what is happening on the side of the world. And it's painful, but I hope, and I'm sure, I pray, I'm sure that it is so, but it comes up so that it can be seen and be healed. And with Saturn and Pisces, you said it so well, Jordan. For me, it's too this washing away of old structures that are not true, that are no longer, that are against love and truth, actually. And but these processes take time. So Pluto is showing us with it this long dance between Capricorn and Aquarius, and Capricorn and Aquarius. This shows us that, and Pluto's carrying the nodes in the last week of July, it's exact. So these all reflect that these are long processes, and I'm just made a YouTube video on my channel where I talk about, it's not about quantum leaping. It's not about creating a new world with one snap. It's really, it goes deep. And I think that this becoming the one, becoming the divine being, becoming the divine person is really a process and a healing process. And it takes time, and I hope that it does not take lifetimes to come there. Yeah.
Great. I just want to add in two quick things and then handing this over to Jonathan. So yesterday I was talking with Tatsi, who I see is here, and Tatsi's reflected something really beautiful to me about the conversation that I had with Jonathan. So I interviewed Jonathan for one talk, and then Jonathan interviewed me. And I think it was in the conversation where Jonathan was interviewing me, Tatsi reflected to me, I think what you were trying to say, Martha, is that you just want to be you want the freedom to be the snowflake that you are, like that we're each, perfect and diverse, and you just are who you are, and it's beautiful, whatever that is. And yes, that's exactly how I feel personally. And then I wanted to also bring in something that my 16-year-old said to me, because so in the Divine Feminine panel discussion at the end, somebody brought up the question of labels. And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. And there was the sense of, on the one hand, that labels are not helpful because it takes us away from our inherent divinity. And then there's this other feeling that I brought up, that labels are also really important and actually life-saving for people who need them. And then by the end of that conversation, Jennifer Ruth Russell brought up the idea that labels are necessary now, but she feels like eventually we will get to the place where we don't need them because we will return to the one. So I brought up this whole idea with my 16-year-old after that panel discussion, because she identifies as transgender and for a while was identifying as gender fluid. So I was really curious what she would say. And she said, "Oh, I completely agree. That's exactly how I feel." In other words, she agrees. She said, "Yes, right this minute, I need these labels. They're really important to me." And absolutely, we're definitely getting to the point eventually where they won't mean anything. But right now I do need them. So I just wanted to throw in that voice there.
Can I speak on something about that,
Yeah.
Martha? Do you
Yeah,
mind? I think right now, you know, when we're going through this restructuring process, like we've all been talking about, where our reality has been defined by society at large, right? You're born with a vagina, so this is the role that you assume. You're born with a penis, this is how you should identify, and this is the role that you should assume. Whereas for eons, people have, before even patriarchal times, that really wasn't a thing. During patriarchal times, it became a thing. And there are people who are really being queer is natural. Same with being, hetero. It's all natural. It's all in a spectrum. But when you are defined by society and given a label that does not allow you, it suppresses how you're feeling inside, right? The deconstruction process is, I need to give language to how I'm feeling so that way I can be vulnerable and we can connect, hopefully. Because if we're doing Saturn and Pisces, this is about love and deconstructing patriarchal man-made laws that really aren't in resonance with the truth. And so right now, people need to have language, because for a very long time, we're talking thousands of years. And if you think about reincarnation, people have been suppressing how they feel. That is very natural. And right now, they're having language for this. And I'm like you, Martha, you know this, I have a non-binary child. And so we have tons of conversations about things like this. And we all know whenever we're expressing our emotions, we have to have language for it. It doesn't even have to deal with labels, right? It's just, I feel this, and this is emotionally coming up. And for us to evolve, we have to tap into the emotional root of all of this. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop there. I hope I'm making sense, right? Okay. All right.
absolutely. And I'm handing this over to Jonathan now.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yes.
I love
yes.
that, Jordan. I love everything that all of you have been saying. And the passage that keeps coming back to me, I'm kind of in a moment right now of being really enjoying the work of Bayo Komolafe, and I can drop this person's name on the chat. And he wrote something that I want to read it, and I want to hear what's coming up for you, and I'll share what comes up for me as well. If you go to his website, this is the first thing that you see. He says, I am quite confident that even as the oceans boil and the hurricanes beat violently against our once safe shores, and the air sweats with the heat of impending doom, and our fists protest the denial of climate justice, that there's a path to take that has nothing to do with victory or defeat, a place we do not yet know the coordinates, a question we do not yet know how to ask. The point of the departed arrow is not merely to pierce the bullseye and carry the trophy. The point of the arrow is to sing the wind and remake the world in the brevity of flight. There are things we must do, sayings we must say, thoughts we must think, that look nothing like the images of success that have so thoroughly possessed our visions of justice. May this new decade be remembered as the decade of the strange path, of the third way, of the broken binary, of the traversal disruption, the kairotic moment, the post-human movement for emancipation, the gift of disorientation that opened up new places of power and of slow limbs. May this decade bring more than just solutions, more than just the future. May it bring words we don't know yet, and temporalities we have not yet inhabited. May we be slower than speed could calculate, and swifter than the pull of gravity of words can incarcerate. And may we be visited so thoroughly and met in wild places so overwhelmingly that we are left undone, ready for composting, ready for the impossible. Welcome to the decade of the fugitive.
Love
It just brings so much. And I feel really emotional just reading that, because it makes me think about all the places within myself that has felt so uncomfortable for so many years. It's like, I don't even dare look at it, you know? And it makes me wonder about this idea that I've been thinking about a lot, of the self as the mirror to the collective. If there are these feelings that I'm feeling that I'm uncomfortable with, what does it say about the collective? You know, is it possible that I'm simply a megaphone to the collective, right? That what I'm feeling is a sliver of the chorus that's going on outside that is currently being silenced. And it's making me think about, what am I holding on to? What are we holding on to? And how do we let go? And how do we feel safe enough to let go? Because I think a lot of this will feel like a loss. You know, I am really sitting with and contemplating and meditating on the glorious loss of structures. I think you were talking about Saturn and Pisces, Jordan, and I really feel this idea of like losing that structure, right? How do we create a current and not necessarily a pipe, right? How do we create aliveness, ecosystem in the ocean without hierarchy? And I don't know the answer to this. I think for so long we've been living with this idea. Michelle brought up the empire, and I really felt that, because I think the empire has taught us to think that the solution is somehow not tied to the structure itself, right? Like somehow the solution is this thing that we kind of can think our way through. But I think there's something about the solution for all of this as being new ways of being, of looking at the world, that we don't even remember. Like it goes so far beyond what we've kind of allowed ourselves to access, right? But it's there. Like we humans have only been here as this version of us, not for very long, you know? And who were we before we were humans? You know, what ways of being were prevalent before we were in these forms that are calling us back to it? You know, I don't know. But I'm just kind of sitting with the discomfort of what is it within me that feels unsafe, that I have to continue grasping. It's like we know, you know, I don't know, I just keep thinking about like our trash, for example, right? Like our trash, we do all this work, you know, to like put them into piles, to nicely recycle them, and then they just get, you know, thrown into places in Africa and Asia. You know, there's like, it's the system itself is so broken that I think the only way maybe is just to, how do we create ways of being that don't rely on that system anymore? You know, and I think to a lot of us, I mean, I can only speak for myself. It's very scary to think about that, right? It's very scary to think about what that new system can look like, and nascence of that new system and the instability of it. But what does it mean if we're thinking about Saturn and Pisces? What does it mean to author a story, right? So often Saturn is connected with authority, but I'm curious more about authorship. You know, how do we create new stories from the instability, right? From that which is inherently moving and inherently changing, because we are always changing. But I think we don't honor that fact enough. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm curious to hear what comes up for all of you. Mm-hmm.
I would actually love to add something, Jonathan, just a little thought, because you said the fear of letting go of these structures and that it is scary. And I would love to, and I feel that so strong with Saturn and Pisces too, that it's actually not about letting go of all structures, because nature has structures too. When you look at a tree, when you look at a leaf, everything is structured in nature. I think it's more about letting go of these structures, and I always love to bring this image with the Capricorn Saturn archetype of the tree that is well structured, but it can grow. So these are flexible structures that evolve and grow and change. And what is always so destructive is when the structures are too crystallized, when they are stuck, when they don't allow expansion, when they don't allow evolution and growth. And we are stuck in such structures that are, and using the words of Gabor Maté here, are not natural, even though they are normal. So I'm just reading the book by Gabor Maté, the myth of normal. The myth of normal, and it's about that what is normal in our society is not natural. It's actually creating trauma, and it is creating trauma, and it is made out of trauma, made out of traumatized systems, made out of fear. And I think putting people and beings into boxes and creating binaries, creating this or that is, I mean, you just do that when you are scared. And I think that these huge healing processes it's really about a restructuring. It's not about a letting go of all structures. It's a letting go of old and outdated structures, and to come back to what is actually natural, even though it is not yet normal, and trusting that, and maybe trusting that when we allow emptiness and space, new structures will arise in a very natural way. And I am personally in very deep deconditioning processes in regard to my over lifetimes lived structures around work, how I have to work, productivity. And I experience how scary it is to let go of certain beliefs, certain rules. But I also see that in the letting go and the emergence of an empty space, new ways and new structures are arising and emerging that are more in tune with my natural pace, with Jupiter and Taurus, with what our somatic capacities, what are our physical needs, what feels really good. And I think with Jupiter and Taurus too, it's so about coming back to our body. What is our natural sexuality? What is our natural creativity? What are our natural ways to live, to love, to work, to walk through this life? And I stop here, but that just came up while you were reading, Jonathan.
Thank you, Verena. I love that.
Yeah, I would like to just add also, thank you for that poem or that writing you shared. And I'm glad you brought in the trauma, because that's what I wanted to bring in, the trauma question. If we do not acknowledge trauma, if we are not working through trauma, it will fester. It will create continuous wars, violence, disconnection, and continue this way of separation. So yes, there's a necessary attention to working with our trauma that we carry individually, that we carry collectively. And if it's not acknowledged, we will not change in a way, while who knows why the way humanity has been created, the way it has been created. And I think it goes back to that discussion around the labels, right? The acknowledgement or the languaging of labels is needed to heal the trauma of being defined, of being put into boxes. And hopefully, as we also spoke, or some of you named, we are moving towards where it's not needed. But right now, there is still some healing needed because our differences have been used to be dominated, to be oppressed, to be shut out. So that is a continuous working through of allowing these platforms to help us to make them not necessary anymore. And unfortunately, sometimes in the process, it becomes restrictive and it can even create more separation. That's where we feel the tension in society of it doesn't help necessarily in greater connection at times when we go into labels, when we try to work through those differences. And yeah, what does safety mean? Safety is also very individual and has a lot to do with our own traumas. And whether I feel safe to walk into a bar, I think that came back to a question that came through through a participant on the Teachable platform, and why is it needed that I need to be acknowledged in my trans fluidity, or that others are asked to be using pronouns that feel weird and strange for some people? It does help to make that inclusion happen, to make environments more welcoming, because there's still fear in my body that I might be hit, that I might be cursed at, that I might be punished in some way. And I think that's what's happening in our polarizations in all kinds of ways. And how can we come back to that essential thing of love, right? Where do we love and continue bringing in that curiosity that Verena also talked about? The curiosity, the openness to understand. I might not totally understand you, but at least I can be present and hope that you will share your experience with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was also really hearing this interesting connection, Nikki, as you were speaking of school trauma. I mean, this is totally unexpected, but I'm hearing as you were speaking too, that one of the reasons why that curiosity can be so difficult is because we've been so traumatized in schools, like there's this grading system, right, which we then import into our society, or maybe the society, informs how we teach our kids at school, right, that kind of create this structure within us that we're afraid of getting an F. Right. So I notice even within myself, as someone who is part of the member of the LGBTQ community. The other day, somebody mentioned a pronoun that I've never heard of before, and I had to Google it. And there's this part of me that felt really threatened by that, because it took me back to being in, 5th grade at a new school and having to impress my teachers in order to survive, And I want to acknowledge that if that's part of the experience, that's like really real. But again, I love what you were saying here, Nikki, about the invitation to look at trauma, because I think that trauma is also the portal to the healing, right? And it's like, yeah, I'm now, I mean, this is my Gemini moon speaking, but I'm really curious about like, what are the ways that we can play with trauma? What are the ways that we can make trauma work feel exciting and playful and artful? I mean, I was thinking, Michelle, about you as someone who worked with art, and and the beauty of using that as a portal to kind of look at our own materials. And I guess I'm really curious to hear if you have anything more to say about that.
I do, actually. Thank you for the invitation. And I'll just start with just sharing my own perspective, not to negate, of course, any other perspectives, but just to add in my own experience after working at a women's transition house and working with women who have had so much trauma. And what I really learned and realized is for me to expect healing or to even invite healing in the way that I was doing was imposing an agenda upon them. And I'm so happy that I learned this because it really changed my perspective. And even in this moment today, and after you read that beautiful writing, I can feel my perspective continuing to change in this moment. And for so long, I was so dedicated. I dedicated years and years and took trainings upon trainings, as many of us have, to seek, the best way to trauma heal. And what I realize now is what I really want is I want everybody to feel cared about. I want to feel everybody to feel included. I want everybody to feel welcome. And that's more sort of the wavelength that I've been resonating on in my own perception of healing, as inclusion, as welcome. And how can I love bigger? How can I love more? And, and how can I be a better ally? How can I support my sisters, brothers, and persons who are under attack, and how can I do it in a way that is inclusive, even for those who are persecuting? So those are my questions. And in terms of the art as process, it's such a beautiful way to work with trauma because it's nonverbal, it's using images, you connect with an image, something from your subconscious pulls something out that has some meaning for you. And you can really access just the imaginal realm, the place where wisdom resides, which all of you who are channeling and working with astrology are working in that realm all the time. It's a very easy access. And I'm always so surprised to see how easy it is for people to connect to their inner wisdom and their intuition in using images. And that's one of the reasons, because it's fun, it's playful. And the other thing I really love about it is I'm really just holding space and providing the materials and the support, and people are connecting to their own wisdom. And I also really love that because then I'm not interpreting or judging or analyzing. And it's a process. And, that's why it's as process. And, and here we all are in this process of becoming the one. Yeah.
Wow. Can I provide a reflection from my own practice? I was thinking the other day, I brought this up to one of my mentors. Sometimes I feel very powerless when I work with certain demographics because of the immensity of the pain. Like I have nothing to say in response. I would be looking at a chart, someone says something, and I'm like, I don't know if I have anything for you. I'm here with you. I'm listening to you. I don't know what to say. And this is kind of making me think about that Leonard Cohen quote, of like the cracks are where the light comes in. And it's so interesting because those moments, and to bring it back to my own school trauma, it's moments where I feel stupid, where I have no words, a Gemini moon with no words is like, what are we even gonna do? But I'm starting to melt into a realization of maybe that's just the moment when I'm just supposed to be with a person, and oftentimes those are the moments where there's something in that moment, in that person's story, that they probably haven't had much chance to have that part of their story be witnessed. And I haven't had a lot of chance in my own life to witness my version of that story. So like, what does it look like for me to just kind of listen in that moment? And I think you provided such a beautiful reflection to that. So thank you. Yeah.
And one more thing I wanted to say is I fully agree with you that in sitting in resonance with another human and witnessing their story, their experience, wherever it is they're at, that in itself is a huge gift and is potentially very healing.
Yeah. Jordan.
So as you guys were like talking, it made me think about how, well, I was recalling I work with a lot of clients. It's pretty much, that's like sexuality and trauma is pretty, I have a packed 8th house and Pluto and Scorpio. So I think like it just calls them all in, like, and so it is about definitely listening, but just like thinking about this in an objective way. It's so interesting, this whole conversation about like the restructuring happening. There's like these buzzwords that we're talking about, like really it's like these Capricorn, Saturn, the distortions of them, right? The suppression. And if you think about trauma, it stems from the suppression of something happening. And to be able to hold space and to witness helps unscrew the Coke bottle, so it can come out. And that way, that's like the healing power, is just to feel seen and heard. And something else I wanted to talk about is, because I find this with clients so often, and I'm sure you guys have too, is I feel like sometimes people get into like trauma Olympics, right? So, or trauma yoga is what I call it. So it's like, oh, but I can't give myself permission to feel this because someone else's trauma is way worse than mine. And here's the thing, is like trauma is trauma. It is affecting us all in the same way, neurologically, as human beings. So I don't want people to dismiss their trauma because they're afraid. Like there's this social construct around like your trauma has to be so bad for it to even be spoken about. That's another form of suppression. So it's just like allowing yourself to say, this was very traumatizing. Even if it was, I saw my dog get hit in the middle of the road, to I experienced a rape when I was 16. Like trauma is trauma. And I think that, whatever it is, that there is a couple of things, as you guys were talking about, what's it going to take for us to come back into center, pretty much is like what I've been hearing, to re-experience whom we are in the most natural sense. And there is a natural law, a natural occurring law. You guys are all gonna know what I'm talking about. It takes an extreme to counteract an extreme. So if we're talking about society, all of a sudden we're having language for things that we didn't, so people can think of that as an extreme, and it's trying to counteract the extreme of the suppression that's happened. And eventually, as the pendulum swings, we'll come back into balance, and there won't have to be these definitions. I was thinking about Krishnamurti as well, because he talks about, by definition, it creates a separation, right? And you can see that, like you can look out into nature and see that everywhere. Like, and so I'm excited for that to happen, whatever lifetime it's going to occur in for me, and being like a part of this right now. And the other thing is, I know I'm kind of all over the place. Saturn and Pisces, we were talking about the fear, because it's the fear of the new, right? It's like, I'm doing something new. I've never done it before. This is really effing scary. And I quote this all the time, but it's with me. Saturn and Pisces, when we're going through this fear, especially as it goes, like Pluto's going back and forth and doing this dance, of really this liberation process that's wanting to occur in society. We can't get rid of fear, but we can ride the fear. So it's like riding this wave of the fear, jumping into this, taking your clothes off first and jumping into Pisces. Like, I don't know where this current's going to take me, but I'm trusting this process, you know? And then through the polarity of Virgo and then the natural inconjunct with Aries, we get to take it one step at a time. Like from each action that we take to dive into this, to say, I'm really scared and I'm going to hold the space for myself that this is really scary. I don't know what I'm doing. That's really what fear is, right? I don't know what I'm doing. Like that, as we do that and we take the courage and we take one step at a time, it creates a counteraction. And through that counteraction, we get to see, did this really work for me? Does this feel authentic? Does this feel true? How am I experiencing this? And then through that, we get to have really Capricornian wisdom come back, because it's this direct experience of this process of, I took one step, I got feedback, I learned from it. And I feel like on a collective level, that is what's happening. And so it's like this whole experience of counteraction occurring right now, like to come back into balance. Am I making sense? I hope that I am.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love what you're saying, Jordan. And it's actually bringing me back to what Verena was saying. And I think that this is interesting because thinking about that polarity of Pisces and Virgo takes me back to what you were saying, Verena, about how nature always has a pattern. Like nature is a pattern-making machine. And it almost is like, how do we trust into the free flow? And while we're in the free flow, we will see patterns emerging, right? And it's like, what do we do when we want to be curious about those patterns that are emerging, but not necessarily attached to them too quickly? I think about the mutability of Virgo as opposed to maybe the fixedness of Taurus or the cardinality of Capricorn, and how in the Virgo archetype, there's something really intelligent about problem solving as you go, right? Like each problem has a slightly different solution, even though it might have recurring patterns. So thank you, Jordan. That's really interesting. Yeah, I guess I'm curious. I feel like there's something you want to say, Martha. Am I just making this up?
No, there's something Nikki wants to say, and I want her to be able to say it. That's
Go
what
for
I'm
it.
thinking.
Yeah, it's kind of going back to some of what about trauma and play and playing with our trauma. Interesting enough, and the arts and how the arts can help in working through our traumas, and body work as well, and yoga. All of those are very essential. Somatic work is essential with trauma. But what I wanted to say is, like, play is actually interrupted in trauma. And that's where what we see when we work with people who are traumatized, also as children, there's a lot of repetition that happens. So, in the arts, the intention is to bring back the access to that play, which is natural. I mean, we can say there's a divine play we are all part of, right? We are part of the divine play of the universe. But when we have certain experiences, whether it's sexual abuse, emotional abuse, developmental abuse, or abuse that's already happening in the womb, you know, when our parents take drugs or whatever else, right? That is where already I'm born with a system organism that's much more sensitive, that can't regulate itself as easily. And the regulation is part of how can we come back to regulating our nervous system so it can act in a natural, optimal way. And trauma interrupts that. But if we bring back play in a good way, it can help with that mirroring that the nervous system needs to self-regulate. So that it is about the self-regulation of, and we need other organisms to self-regulate. That's also where nature comes in. That helps our nervous system when the human is not there to help us, right? We can be helped through the regulation of nature, of trees, of being with these other allies and beings that can help us actually, because our human people around us might not be able to do that. And I think that's essential to name and be with, how do we, so that we can come away from that fear response that separates us, but we can come back from our responsive system that recognizes that interconnectedness of everything. So continuously being in that, and the arts can also help to access, as Michelle said, that nonverbal part, because some of our traumas are nonverbal, and the terror cannot be accessed through talk therapy. It cannot be accessed because we don't know, we don't have words. We might have been precognitive at that time, so words won't hit it. And if my nervous system is agitated, anxious, I can't even take in words. So the importance of what you spoke to, just listening, being in resonance, being there to be regulating. This is also what I see in my practice, and which makes it harder when we are only working online. But how my nervous system as a being, as a therapist with my clients, is essential for them to co-regulate, because in our anxiety, we cannot regulate ourselves. And so the listening, the being with, being present, the curiosity we already named, kindness, compassion, all of these things become so important when we are in this process of healing our wounds around gender, sexuality, all of it, right? But and it is beautiful to see the renaissance or the deepening of that trauma language, because I do think it unifies us actually to look at intergenerational trauma, collective trauma, and our personal traumas. And I also liked what Jordan said, not to minimize your own trauma, even if the trauma of another looks so much bigger. I mean, it took me a while to realize, oh yes, that was it. But it's also our interpretation, like the experience in itself doesn't need to be a trauma either, but it is part of how we are experiencing it. And if we already have a nervous system that's very sensitive and fragile, certain experiences will be much larger for us than somebody who has a nervous system that's regulated. And this is where all these practices of yoga, walking, being in nature, drinking enough water, taking good care of this body makes such a difference of living in this world.
Now, is it okay if yes. I could second all of that. And, I was a therapist in the child welfare system for a really long time, and I investigated child abuse, and I treated child abuse and testified on the stand about child abuse. So I just second all of that. And there's so many things I could say, but I really want to bring in a question that I think Nikki would probably be a great person to answer. And if anybody else wants to answer, certainly feel free. But feels like a really important question to get to before we end, which is the reality that in the mental health world, in the diagnostic statistical manual, the thing that therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists use to diagnose people, there is a long history of queer identities being associated with mental illness, quote unquote. So somebody asked a really important question, which is, okay, if my gender identity is labeled as a mental illness, how can I possibly not have shame or feel bad about myself, or even get to the point of feeling suicidal? Because even the mental health professionals are telling me there's something very wrong with me, to the point that they're giving me a diagnosis saying I'm mentally ill because I have a gender identity that's non-conforming with what they think, whatever society says. So I'll give my really quick answer to that, and then I would love to hear Nikki, but if anybody else wants to jump in, we're kind of coming to the end of our time, so I'm going to be quick on this. I would just say, again, from having been a psychotherapist, having diagnosed a bazillion people for the courts, and having thought a lot about what the DSM actually is. Okay, first of all, it is written by humans. All of the definitions in there are made up by humans. They're not, they're not like, there's no diagnosis that I can think of in mental illness that you can look under a microscope and say, oh, here is the thing that is called ADHD. That doesn't exist, right? So even when we label something attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that is a human constructed list of symptoms that that humans have decided we're going to group under a label. So the biggest thing to say about this is that there's nothing real about the DSM. Like, there isn't. It is humanly constructed, humanly written. And so just because humans have decided that gender identity is a mental disorder does not mean that it is, right? There's no like virus that causes a person to have a gender identity. It's not a thing. Yeah, so that's just really, really, really important. And I will also add that, yes, absolutely. I've seen on Facebook people saying things like, well, being transgender is just another form of OCD. I don't know where they're getting that, but just wow, like, yes. So I think this is a really important question to address, because it can be very damaging to people. And Nikki, I would love your thoughts, but anybody else who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I first of all think the DSM needs to go. But the thing is that, the thing I would say, it grew out of a Western medical system of pathology and needing kind of a language. So right now, the difficulty or paradox is we're needing it in order to get insurance being paid. We need it in order to get treatments covered, right? To get operations for those transitioning who would like operations covered. And so that's the complexity right now. Yes, it needs to go, but at the same time, right now, the system, how it's working, it helps us to get services. So that's a complexity. And I think the complexity with diagnosing people, it will never capture a person fully. Sometimes it can be really relieving for some people to hear diagnosis because they feel, oh, it's not just me. There are other people who have this. So I don't want to say it's all, and it was made by mainly white male people coming up with concepts and sharing and it might be some phenomena that have been observed. But as we spoke earlier with labels, it's always a lens we are looking through, and the lens is always limiting. But it can sometimes also provide some kind of relief while it's mainly pathologizing. And I think that's what the person's speaking to. I've experienced more shame and stigma through having a diagnosis out there, and where homosexuality and other ways of being have been pathologized. I think homosexuality was taken out as a pathology in the 70s, maybe, I don't know exactly when. But so yeah, it's paradoxical, it's crazy, and I hope it will go at some point. We don't need these labels and diagnoses to cover services for people. But if it is helpful for someone to understand themselves and to feel relief, then it can also be useful. I'm a both and person often, so I see it emerged out of something and it was needed for something. But right now it's restrictive also. And that's where it's harmful to some of us, of seeing ourselves through that pathologizing lens where we're seen as less than or not good enough, and that we are struggling already with as a human, right? We constantly move that dance. I'm too much, I'm not enough. And where can I come back to my wholeness and feeling my wholeness? And I think that's where the astrology comes in, or archetypal language comes in, or the tarot, right? This is why you are bringing in this astrology, because it's much less shaming. It's not shaming, right? It's more, in a good way, depersonalizing and transpersonal. And sometimes diagnosis can also be transpersonal, but unfortunately, they have been very shaming and stigmatizing, and not seeing the beauty and the resiliency and the, also another part I want to say about trauma. Trauma also creates an amazing creativity, creates that part of the chaos that is also our part, and it creates that wildness. It can be an adventure. It brings up a new way of me responding and being in this world. It doesn't have to be only the shadow, the trauma, when we use that language, right? I mean, I don't want people to experience trauma, but at the same time, it also creates a way of, oh, wow, it's part of my uniqueness too.
I would quickly like to say that not all astrology. I think a lot of astrology, I mean, you're amongst astrologers that speak your language. I think there's a lot of growth to come in astrology also in that respect.
Soul, the astrology that speaks from the soul, I guess, not the astrology that's also part of the patriarchal stereotyped way of being in the world.
Exactly.
Everything Nikki said and everything Louise said. Yes. And we do have to wrap up, but Jordan, did you want to say something really quick?
Yeah, I love, Nikki, like how you, for lack of better terms, you like played a devil's advocate. I have a Libra moon, so I loved it. But what I do want to say is, because I read that question, Martha, that you had posted that someone else had, correct? It was in the email. And so I just want to speak, I don't know if this person is on here or not, but I do want to speak directly to that. I think I've been personally pathologized by a therapist sibling before, and it created tons of trauma for me, an extreme amount of trauma. And it's because it wasn't there. I'm not even going to go into it. There's definitely, other stuff there, but I just want to have reverence for this person. And we're talking about listening to where someone's coming from, and to be pathologized for your truth, which is essentially what we're talking about, is really hurtful. And that's what I got out of that message, that the question. And I just want to have reverence for that person, that being pathologized for your own truth it is so hurtful. And I just want them to feel seen and heard in that way. And to understand that, yes, the TSM was written largely by patriarchal men who have an elitist attitude. It's not, far off of the same things that we've seen with people of color and systemic racism. It's very much along kind of the same context as that. And so just understanding and reconnecting with your inner voice of knowing that there is a difference between fact and opinion. And I just want that person to really feel seen, So.
Thank you, Jordan. I honestly can talk with all of you for the next 3 days. We can keep the Zoom link open, the Zoom room open if there's nothing else. But I do want to respect everyone's time. Thank you so much for all of you who have been on this panel. This has been, I mean, I honestly don't know what to expect when Martha invited me to do this, but this has just been so lovely to meet all of you and to hear all of your experiences and perspectives. And I also want to recognize the risk that we have all taken to be on this panel, and how edgy this conversation feels. And And also, you know, to the people that we don't have on camera here, who are the participants, and those of you who have been listening, you know, energetically being here with us, and, you know, putting your thoughts and reflections on the chat. And I just want to say that wherever you are, I hope you know that you're not alone, and that doing this work is like so fucking crucial at this moment, really. And I cannot thank you enough for like being here, and those of you listening in the future as well. It's incredible to have all of you here. I think the work happens on so many multiple levels, and at this point, I'm just really grateful whenever I see anyone doing any work. And I think that's what matters the most. There's so many different ways to look at this. There are so many different perspectives. I think we live in a world where the multiverse exists, right? Like even within this panel, we're not all, you know, in sameness, but I think this is part of what's exciting about minds coming together, like this symposium, because we all can have different perspectives and experiences, and we all can have slightly different realities, but we can just be, yeah, supporting one another. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, and I would love to end on the note of taking 10 seconds to drop into ourselves, and if I can say this without crying, send into the world and surround every single being with this reality that you are divine and you are perfect, and surrounding every being with safety, feeling loved and held, celebrated, and known in exactly who you are. Whatever the perfect snowflake is for you in any moment. Yeah, I just feel that as the prayer of existence. I feel that that's what source is. Thank you all so much. And so it is.
So it is.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Unfortunately, I have to run, but it was
Yes.
very beautiful to be present. And as Jonathan also named, and thank you, Jordan, for naming what you named. But I just want to say that, yeah, we could go on for days, and I would love to do that. But
Yes.
Thank you, Nikki. I loved hearing your reflections, and thank you, Martha. Like, you know, I don't know any of you guys, and I loved this. So
Yeah, I knew this was going to be a really special group. I knew it.
yeah, I love you all. Fell in love with
Bye,
all of
Nikki.
you. Okay, bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Martha.
Yes, thank you, Martha. It was lovely.
See you tomorrow.
Yes, very good. Bye.